Welcome to the Don't Fight the Freeze Masterclass. We've got a lot that we're covering tonight, actually. And please, as you're coming in, please just make sure that you're on mute. As you're coming in, please make sure you're on mute. And as people are still coming in, I'm still letting people in here, and I would love to know why you're here. What is your intention in being here for this class? What brought you here? Just put it in the chat. I'm in freeze. Yes, I'm in high freeze. A lot in struggling, hoping to learn more to get out of it. Absolutely. Hello from Canada. I am also teaching from Canada today. Now, can you see me on the screen? To be more effective when working with clients, please mute as you're coming in. Please mute as you come in. You see me? Okay. For some reason, I am seeing Sandy's iPhone on my screen. I'm not sure why that is. But you guys are seeing me. Good. From Scotland. Welcome from Scotland. Lots of UK people here. Hello from England. I'm in burnout and overwhelmed, and that says. Greetings from Alberta. I'm coming at you from Ontario, Canada tonight. Yeah, I did change the view button. Thank you. It's not working. Welcome as you're coming in. There we go. Hi, I'm from Canada. I'm in a freeze from childhood. Hello from Brooklyn, New York. Awesome. So tonight, my intention is to provide you with an understanding, a more specific understanding about what is actually happening in your body or in your client's body, if you're a practitioner. What is happening in your body? What is happening in your client's body when they are actually dealing with chronic freeze? And so my intention tonight is to deliver you some understanding, some practical tools, and to do an exercise that can be very, very effective for working with the freeze response. And I'm also going to share with you an opportunity to take this work deeper for those of you who want to do this work in a more focused, contained way with me. But before I start teaching about some of the technicalities of the freeze response, I want to take you back in time to when I was about 14, 15 years old. And at this point, I'm around 14 or 15, just starting high school. And I'm a young kid that's grown up in a very dysfunctional home, very chaotic home. Of course, when you grow up that way, you don't really know the difference. It's your normal, right? Dysfunctional is how you function. That's your normal. And so I had been homeschooled by my mom, who struggled with, among other things, untreated paranoid schizophrenia. And she could be quite abusive, both abusive and neglectful in many ways. And she had homeschooled me, and I was an only child. And this was really all I knew, was just a high stress, high stakes, high chaos environment. And so now I'm an adolescent, I'm 14, and I'm walking home from school, and I don't know it at the time, but I am profoundly sad. And I can remember every single day dreading the walk home, not quite knowing why. And at the time, I was part of a group, a religious group that I had grown up in, that, you know, women had to wear these long skirts. And so I'm walking home in the sun, and I'm hot, and I'm wearing this long jean skirt. And I get home, and I don't know that I'm sad because I'm so disconnected. I'm just going through the motions of life at this point. I get home and I turn on the TV. It makes me feel so much less lonely. And I eat. And I just kind of watch the TV. And years later, in recovery, I remembered that time. And as I remembered that time, for the first time, I felt sadness. I felt how sad I was at that time. What was happening to me? I was coming out of the freeze response. I was coming out of, at that point, I was in my 20s, over 2 decades of being stuck in the freeze response. And what we're going to talk about today is what that looks like. How do we get into the freeze response? Why does the body do that from a biological perspective? Very good reasons for that. And we're going to be looking at how do we come out of that? I didn't know I was in the freeze response. And so until I was in my 20s, what I did was I just pushed through my life. I wasn't connected. I wasn't feeling. I was wandering through my life in a series of unsafe situations, unsafe relationships. I had no idea that I was stuck in overwhelm. And so my way of fighting through my life was to push through the profound shutdown, the profound freeze response that I, of course, at the time I didn't know was the freeze response. I just thought that was normal. That was just life. But when I came out of the freeze response, I started to feel. And when I started to feel not just my emotions, but also my sensory experience, my life changed profoundly. So that is what we're going to look at tonight. We're going to look at how do we actually come out of the freeze response ourselves? How do we support our clients to come out of the freeze response? And how do we do it in such a way where we're not fighting the freeze response? We're not pushing through a cathartic breakthrough. We're not clamoring and clawing our way over top of the freeze response in our life, but we are actually safely coming out of the freeze response in such a way that we are experiencing more of our life from a place of connection, embodied connection. And the word embodied is floating around all over the place, but it just means a sense of connection to our bodies. That's all it means. Simple, simple, but not easy. Not easy at all. So here's what we're covering tonight. 3 keys to understanding the freeze response, like what it actually is. If we're going to solve a problem, we have to have a pretty good understanding of what the problem actually is. Because the more we understand the problem, the more the solution begins to naturally present itself. And when it comes to the freeze response, there is so much information out there, right, at varying degrees of accuracy. But we're going to get down to the brass tacks of it tonight. We're going to talk about exactly what it is. And we're going to talk about how we can come out of it. We're going to look at 3 surprising signs of chronic freeze that you probably typically would not have associated with a chronic freeze response. And we're going to look at how to recognize it in yourself and your clients. And how all trauma, doesn't matter what kind of trauma, complex trauma, acute trauma, shock trauma, developmental trauma, all trauma always has an element, a component of the freeze response within it. That's actually how it becomes trauma. We're going to look at how the freeze response affects energy, what it does to your energy, your physical energy system, and how you can actually interrupt that cycle and introduce energy to the system so that you are not stuck at low levels of energy. We're also going to look at why fighting through the freeze response simply does not work. And I mean, you can put in the chat, right? Like, how many of you have tried to fight the freeze response? If fighting the freeze response worked, I would be the first one to tell you that it worked, and I would be the first one to explain how exactly it works, because I have tried. Okay, if there was a way to fight through the freeze response, you better believe it, I would know it and I would tell you. But unfortunately, it doesn't work. So we're going to talk about what we can do instead. I'm going to share with you how you can take this journey further. And we're going to do some nervous system work, a nervous system exercise around the freeze response. So first things first, I want to show you what it looks like for the nervous system to be in a regulated place, in a place where our digestion is healthy, we feel a connection to ourselves, we feel a connection to the environment, and we feel a connection to the people around us. When we feel safe, when we feel like we have energy, more than enough energy, but not so much energy that we're feeling anxious, where we feel the capacity to focus and pay attention, we're not rigidly hyper-focused so that it's stressing us out, but we're able to pay attention. We're able to recognize what's going on and to respond appropriately. That is what's called the window of tolerance. That is the place where your body, not your mind, but your body is not overwhelmed by stress. It's not shutting down and it's not overactive. This is also referred to by some as a place of calm aliveness. And this is the place where we feel our healthiest and where our cells do their best regeneration, where our bodies do their best at taking out the trash, the toxins, naturally. We're repairing, we're digesting. We actually need to be in a safe nervous system state to digest our food properly. But when we get out of that window of tolerance, that place of regulation, we go one of two places. We go to a high sympathetic place where we are mobilized, meaning our bodies have set forth the process of moving to protect ourselves from a threat. So we're no longer just sort of relaxed and responding to our environment. Now we're getting ready. We're getting ready to protect ourselves. And that's good, right? We want that. We want to be able to get ready to protect ourselves if there is a threat coming at us. So when we get in that high sympathetic state, where we're looking for the threat, we're prepping for the threat, and there's this sense of urgency. Something needs to be done. Something needs to be done now. Something's going to happen. And we might feel our heart rate increase. We might feel like if we're stuck in that high sympathetic place, that we feel kind of like a raw nerve walking through the world. We're oftentimes in high defense, or sometimes people call it hypervigilance, like I'm getting ready for something bad to happen. And if we get stuck in high sympathetic, we will look for something bad to happen. It's kind of like if you're in high sympathetic and your friend says, oh, you look nice today. If you're in your window of tolerance, you're going to be like, oh, thank you. But if you're in high sympathetic, you're going to be like, well, don't I look nice every day? You're defensive, you're protective, right? In that high sympathetic place. Now, if you spend too much time stuck in that high sympathetic place, your body's going to do something else, because we can't spend forever in that high sympathetic state. It's too taxing on the body. It's too demanding. So we have another mechanism, another branch of our nervous system that will kick in and take us into what we call sometimes the shutdown or the freeze response. And this is the opposite of that active, high sympathetic, raw nerve, high defense feeling. This is a heavier and or more rigid feeling where we sort of are now, we're not getting ready to get through something that's taking too much energy. So now we're acquiescing. The system is shutting down and saying, we don't have the resources to really meet this challenge or to stay in that threatening place, that high sympathetic place. So instead, we're going to actually bind up all that stress energy and contain it and shut you down. I'm wondering, for those of you that are here, if you can put in the chat, which of those states you relate to the most? The window of tolerance, the sympathetic, high sympathetic, or the low kind of shut down, crashing parasympathetic? Which one of those do you relate to the most? Both. Yeah, Ellen, we're going to be talking about that in a second. Going in and out. Yeah, actually both at different times. Well, that doesn't surprise me, right? Because we're here talking about the freeze response. High sympathetic, low, shut down, all at different times. Yeah. Shut down predominantly, but sometimes both. So then what happens when we are vacillating too quickly between both of these states? This is kind of what it looks like. Shut down at home, high outside the home. Yes, I can very much relate to that. For sure. For sure. Absolutely. So what happens when we are cycling through both of these states all the time? Well, what happens is that our window of tolerance, meaning our stress resilience, not our mental capacity to push through, but our body's physical capacity for stress, all of us have a threshold. And when we cross that threshold, our body talks back to us. That's what I'm talking about, your physical threshold of stress, because I know what it's like to be like, oh, I can handle that. But really, we're just disconnecting and running and pushing through, right? So if we are, as many of you guys have said, cycling through both of these all the time, our window of tolerance starts to shrink. So now where maybe we could go to this threshold, we're starting to, you know what? I can't do it as much. My window of tolerance is decreasing. I'm becoming now even more easily stressed out. I'm becoming now even more easily shut down. And the more I push, the less stress capacity I have. And this is chronic freeze. This is chronic freeze. So it's not just the acute freeze response. For example, if I was in a really terrifying situation and I freeze in the moment, right? This is beyond that now. This is to where the freeze response has become part of your physiology. It has become your body's way of moving through life. Steph says, this is so relatable. Yeah, unfortunately, it's relatable. It is. It is. Mm-hmm. So we're cycling between these survival states. The body's doing its best, but we're stuck. So what happens here is then, for those of us that are type A and high performing and high achieving, this was me, because even while I was that 14-year-old girl walking home heavy and sad, but completely disconnected from that, I was getting my A's at school, and I was, participating really well in leadership at church, right? And I was working two jobs when I turned 16 and living off caffeine. What happens is we start to get into this pattern where we cannot get energy through being in our window of tolerance. So we have to push through using adrenaline, using caffeine. And in order for us to have energy, it has this high frenzied tone to it, this intensity to it, rather than it's almost like we're over energized. And then when we're done, we crash and go back into the shutdown. That's chronic freeze, or as some call it, functional freeze. Functional freeze, meaning I'm moving through the world. I'm walking home. I'm not literally in a state of tonic immobility where I'm not moving at all, right? But at the same time, I'm living through this cycle, and the freeze response has become so stuck to my biology, so bound to my physiology, that I don't spend any time in that regulated, settled, relaxed place. I'm either shut down all the way down, or I'm all systems go. So let's take a deeper look at this. Zoe, sometimes I can't function. People don't understand it. Now at least I know what's happening. Yeah. Yeah. So 3 keys to understanding the freeze response. The first one to understand is that the freeze response is the body's mechanism for kind of binding up overwhelming energy that is not being used, so that you can maintain survival. You can maintain a homeostasis, a semblance of internal balance. Our first option in stress is meant to be action. It's meant to be, I fight my way through or I run away. But if that is not available, if the body decides, hey, we don't have the resources to fight, right? We don't have the resources to run. For example, if we're little, we're in a dysfunctional home where fighting and leaving is not an option, well, the body's still going to do something for us. It's still going to help us with the stress, but it's going to help us differently. It's going to actually push that down, bind that up, and shut us down. Doesn't go away. That survival energy, that stress activation doesn't go away. It just gets sort of bound up within the freeze response. So if we are living in a chronic freeze, it's not because there's nothing going on and we're just empty and we're just not, no, it's actually because there's too much survival stress. There's too much intensity for us to tolerate. So it's going to the last resort. I think about it almost like, you know, those movies where they're on a spaceship, like Star Trek or something. I'm not really familiar with it, but you know, it's like the body, what's happening is it's like, okay, there's somebody at the helm, right? Your body's making these quick snap decisions and there's somebody at the helm and they're going, okay, Captain, engage fight response, not available. Engage flee response, not available. Okay, Captain, moving to freeze. That's what's happening in your body, in your physiology. It's making these decisions, right? It's going down the ladder and it's picking what is optimized the most for survival. So in order to resolve chronic freeze, in order to come out of chronic freeze, we can't push through all that intensity, all that overwhelm. We can't do that because it's going to overwhelm our system even more. And we're going to talk about what we can do instead. Number 2, the freeze response is always part of trauma. When it comes to stored trauma and stored stress, not an acute situation that happens kind of in a flash and you freeze and then somebody comes close to you and you're able to get their support, register that it's safe, and discharge the adrenaline and, oh, I'm safe. That's over. I'm here. I've survived. That's not stored trauma. Stored trauma is when that freeze response gets stuck. There is no felt sense of resolution that it's over in the body system. So the body's still preparing for the threat, building up that energy, mobilizing that energy, and then at the same time, binding up that energy. We hear often the gas and the brake on at the same time. So when there's stored trauma, the freeze response is always involved. It's like it's always there somewhere. It's always hidden somewhere. So it's a key survival mechanism of stored trauma and stress. Number 3, if you're storing chronic stress, you're not just frozen for a moment in time. You are functionally or chronically frozen, meaning that you're cycling between that high activation, shutdown, high activation, shutdown, and the freeze response is sort of dormant. So those stress responses are not finished. They're not complete from a physiological perspective. It's almost as though they're churning through the body. And the only break that is given to the system is that shutdown, that disconnection, that crash. That's the break until we have to re-engage again with life. And this combination, if we go back to this slide here, this combination is the combination that produces the most symptoms: autoimmune symptoms, depressive symptoms, digestive symptoms, chronic pain symptoms, relationship issues, mood issues. That's where the symptoms start showing up. So Krista says, number 1 is different from my understanding of freeze, but instead that the body has used up all its energy and that to survive, it must radically conserve energy. That is also a possibility that can happen where the resources have been depleted. We've used up all the resources. They've been depleted. But many times, if we deal with a chronic freeze, what happens is the body actually skips over the use of the energy and we'll just pull the brake. We'll just opt for the freeze response. So that is happening so fast. It's not like we're sitting there consciously like, okay, can I fight? Can I flee? It's happening so quickly because our body intuition has used this mechanism over and over to where that track has been laid down, and that becomes just sort of how we operate, how we move through the world. That was the original understanding of freeze, Krista, was that that exhaustion phase, almost like you're mentioning there, where, you know, there's this fight and this flight, and then there's that exhaustion phase. So I'd love to know in the chat, are there any light bulbs going off for you? Annette says, is this what burnout is? Yes, it absolutely can be. It absolutely can be. And that's why rest in the traditional form doesn't solve the problem of burnout, because it's a physiological issue. It's a nervous system state issue. So he says, I feel so valid. Good, good. Elizabeth, are we going to get the slides? Yes. Well, you're not going to get the slides, but you're going to get the replay of the class so that you can watch it again, listen to it again. All right, let's keep chugging along. Is this making sense for everybody? Is there a stage after chronic freeze? Yes, there is. But we don't get there if we don't have the nervous system capacity for that. Helen, feels like being two different people. Do not know who I am, going back and forth. Yeah. Yeah. So now, 3 surprising signs and symptoms of chronic freeze. When we think of the freeze response, we typically do not think about anxiety. We do not typically think about panic as a symptom of chronic freeze. Like, chronic freeze isn't that you're immobile, you're not moving. Like, why are you so activated if you're in chronic freeze. Shouldn't you just be kind of shut down, curled up in a ball? Well, no, that's not it. That's not how it works. Because we know that chronic freeze is about cycling through these states, oftentimes so very rapidly. So very rapidly. If you've just come in, I'm going to just ask you to mute. Please and thank you. So how can anxiety and panic be associated with freeze? Well, we're talking about an incomplete stress response. Right? We're talking about intense survival energy that was mobilized in a time of threat or perceived threat that we weren't able to use and see it through to the end. So now it's become stuck. Now we've become stuck. And that's why that anxiety, it's like it's lingering. It's not going anywhere. Right? Like, oh, I've been diagnosed with anxiety. I have a panic disorder. Well, from a nervous system perspective, we see that the sympathetic system is not turning off. It's just not turning off. It's stuck. The only time it turns off is when we crash. What about migraines and headaches? How on earth can that be associated with chronic freeze? Pain in general is associated with chronic freeze, whether that's becoming oversensitized to pain, where your pain tolerance, your system is so sensitive to pain. Just going to ask you to mute if you've just come in. So we're either dulled in that we're not feeling pain, we're not feeling that connection with it, which isn't good. We want to be able to sense when we're experiencing pain. Or we're too sensitized to pain. And so frequent migraines and headaches can actually be a sign of the system that's dysregulated, that's stuck in chronic freeze. ADHD symptoms, brain fog, struggling to focus, inattentive, tuning out, right? Or hyperactive, having so much energy, always needing to move, feeling like, oh my gosh, there's always energy left over. It's too much. Or that sort of more daydreamy, inattentive ADHD. This is nervous system dysregulation. And this is very closely associated with the freeze response, in particular, brain inflammation, which we're not covering today. We're not covering that today, but this is a very, very prominent sign that the system has been stuck in chronic freeze. Any of these symptoms relatable for you guys? Jerry says brain fog. All of them. What about, is there any practitioners here? If there's practitioners here, you might notice that clients that have certain emotional patterns tend to present with certain physical patterns as well. Steph, yes, so many of my patients. Yeah. 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 Notice this with clients. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So this is a study where they were looking at tonic immobility, freeze response in animals and in humans. They wanted to look at it particularly in humans in this particular study because it's much more well studied in animals. Of course, we as humans share a lot of similar nervous system traits with mammals, right? But here's what they found. For example, anxiety has been associated with persistent freeze and flight tendencies. Anxiety has been associated with persistent freeze. So it's in the literature. It's actually in the literature. Whereas aggression is related to reduced freezing and heightened fight tendencies. So for those of you guys that are here as a practitioner, maybe you're a massage therapist, a therapist, a coach, a nutritionist, how do we actually recognize this in our clients? If you're a therapist, I'm sure you're familiar with the phrase, "I'm fine." You're working with this client, they're very functional, they're doing all these things in their life. But when you ask, "And how are you?" "I'm fine." It's hard for them to connect to their body. It's hard for them to connect to their own emotional experience. This is a sign of chronic freeze. That was me. Even though I had memories of walking up in the sun, hot, and I would always see that image oftentimes, there wasn't any real emotion attached to it. It wasn't an integrated experience. It wasn't until I started to come out of chronic freeze that I felt that memory. Also, if clients, when they start to connect to their sensation or they start to connect to their emotions, they become overwhelmed, overstimulated. It's too much for them. Or they connect to their emotions in session and then they come back the next week and say, "Oh my gosh, I had my migraines flared up so bad. My digestion was so bad." It was so activating to connect to their sensation and emotion, and they're having flare-ups that are regressing their functioning. That's the sign of a client that's spent too much time in chronic freeze. Clients who are addicted to stimulation. It's like they're easily bored. They need a lot of movement in their work with you. They need a lot of caffeine. They're in session and they're grabbing at things and they're always moving and they're looking around. That can be a sign of chronic freeze. Clients that struggle to rest and settle even with your support. That was me. When I first started working with a practitioner, she was there, but I still needed a lot of support to actually, to settle, to be present. Because I was dealing with chronic stress, chronic freeze. Being seen was not safe. A relationship like that was not safe. So it took a lot of time for me to even settle, even with well-intentioned support. These are your clients that you say, oh, take a deep breath, and they take a deep breath, and that did nothing. That did not help. They're like, that did not help. I'm stimulated. I don't feel good. Where your traditional little grounding tools for your clients that are more resourced and more regulated, they settle those clients. But for your clients that are more in chronic freeze, they need a bit more time. You need to spend the first, 20 minutes of just helping them get settled in session. And any client that has had severe attachment trauma, I hesitate to say severe, but because it's attachment trauma in and of itself is severe, because it deals with us when we're young, when we're vulnerable, when our nervous systems need the bodies of other people to support us, to keep us safe. Therefore, any attachment trauma is technically severe. But these are your clients who are going to be so predisposed to the freeze response. Hello, that was me. That I didn't really even have any access to the fight response, to the flee response. It was like, freeze is where I go. I go to freeze. We're skipping steps. We're going to freeze. That's where we go. And there's reasons for that I cover in my program. But that's what you need to know about clients that have severe attachment trauma or attachment trauma in general, is there's going to be a component of chronic freeze with them. What about energy? I think this is one of the most frustrating, challenging pieces to deal with when you are dealing with storage stress and trauma, is the inconsistent energy, the not being able to rely on or trust yourself to make a commitment because you don't know where your energy levels are going to be at that particular time. And there's so much that we want to do. There's so much that we want to be. But the energy cost is just tremendous. Why is that? Because the freeze response actually starts to impact how your cells make and produce energy. The mitochondria is the place in the body where the energy is produced. ATP, for those of you guys that are into all the biology. And what happens, because we're designed to spend a lot of our life in our window of tolerance. We're designed to spend most of our life here. But if we're spending all of our life in high sympathetic shutdown, this starts to impact the energy system of the body, because the cells now are not as able to efficiently produce energy. They're not as able to efficiently take out the trash, detoxify the system. And they need to produce more energy for the same tasks. The task that took this amount of energy last year, now it's taking this amount. So this is at the cellular level, this is happening. The whole system becomes oriented to just get me through right now. What is the next thing in front of me? So if you're working with clients and they're like, they really have a hard time seeing the big picture. They live in a crisis. They don't want to set goals, right? They don't want to look ahead. They're like, I'm just trying to get through right now, today, this minute. That's literally the cells talking. The cells are saying, We don't have enough energy. We can't keep up. Don't ask us to plan. Don't ask us to long range plan ahead. It's going to cost us too much. What's in front of me right now, this second? Just like we prioritize in our life, if we've got a lot on our plate, there are non-essential things that kind of fall to the wayside, and we just focus on the essentials. Well, our cells do the same thing. Our bodies do the same thing. So if we are in a chronic freeze, our body's going to be focusing on survival. How many of you guys can relate to that? Ada, having a difficult time with the people I love. Once I go through a difficult time with them, I can't be around them. Doris, one of my symptoms of the freeze response was screaming and nothing would come out. I had no voice. Even my voice was frozen. You guys starting to make connections, those of you that are practitioners with certain clients. Won't be every client, but there will be a few clients, you know, anywhere from 20 to 50% of clients where it's like, the old trusty tools are not supporting this particular client. It's not because they don't want help. It's not because they don't want to do the work. There's limited resources from spending too much time in chronic freeze. Tracy, it builds over the years. Yeah. Absolutely. So what do we do about it? Well, we don't fight it. You guys have probably been fighting it for a long time. If you're like me, I was fighting it for 20 years. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what was happening with my body. I had no idea what was happening with my body. I was like, yeah, life is supposed to be like 20,000 to the nth degrees hard. It's just supposed to be horrifically hard all day, every day to do simple things. Right? Certainly suffering is a part of life. Certainly life can be hard. But my essential message was that, no, life is excruciatingly hard all the time. So we can't fight it. We can't fight it. Why? Because it's the body's natural mechanism. It's what the body is actually wanting and needing to do. It's wanting to shut down. It's wanting to droop. It's wanting to curl into a ball. It's wanting to feel the weight of something heavy and soft. But what we do is we fight it. Nope, I got to hold myself up. I've got to keep pushing. Many of us don't even know that it's an option to not keep pushing. It's like somebody's like, well, you don't have to keep pushing. You're like, what? Can't compute. Cannot compute. I'm blank. I'm not getting it. I can stop. What does that mean? And oftentimes we've kind of started to build mental habits around our body's state. So it's a physiological state, it's a biological state, and it's resulted in patterns of thinking like I have to keep going. I gotta fight it. But the problem is what the freeze response does for us is it actually supports us to conserve energy when we don't fight it. And when we don't just check out and scroll, there's a middle ground. There's something else we can do, and we can follow the freeze response. We don't have to, if we're sitting there feeling rigid and holding ourselves up. Well, the body's not wanting to do that. So can we let it just droop for a second? Right? Can we give our eyes that rest from the screen? And if you're working with clients, we support our clients to detach the fear of stopping from the actual just natural experience of the freeze response, because the body will naturally make its way out. This is amazing, you guys. Your body is amazing. When it gets what it needs and it follows its proper sequence, it will naturally make its way out of the freeze. It's incredible. So we don't have to force it. We just need the right components, the right education, the right understanding, so that we can teach and support our bodies to do what they are actually designed to do. It's very, very cool. So we can't fight it. We can't push through it. We can't get around it. And in fact, when we try, what happens? This happens. My window tolerance just gets so small, and then I live to push through another day. But when we actually allow ourselves to follow the freeze response, and we have to titrate it, meaning we have to do that bit by bit, the system will naturally reproduce energy, conserve energy with time, and come out of that chronic freeze. And then as we're making our way out, we start to feel and sense some of that intensity of the stress response. Some of that survival energy, we start to feel that. Our body sensations come back. The emotions, the movements start to come back. This is why we go to the freeze response, you guys, because that stuff does not feel good. It was overwhelming at the time. So now, in coming out of that, we're teaching the body how to metabolize that little by little. So that means feeling some things that don't feel great to feel, bit by bit, not pushing for this big cathartic breakthrough. It might just be, feeling that one tear, that 2 minutes of grief in the tummy or the chest, that ache in the shoulder, right? The body sensations start to come back as we make our way out of the freeze. And this is where most people, once they start to feel that, they go back into the freeze because they're like, oh, this is horrible. I don't like this, right? So we have to build up a capacity to feel a sense of goodness in our bodies, to learn how to actually self-regulate. And so this is a bit by bit process that we practice. And what's amazing is that, no, it's not a quick fix. It's not an instant pill. And at the same time, we start to feel differences happening right away, bit by bit. So we want to follow and we want to befriend the freeze response. So here's where it gets a bit more practical. We want to practice sensation. Practice sensation. And when I say practice sensation, I don't mean, go for the tough stuff and process those intensities. No, I mean, what does it feel like for your feet to be on the floor? if we're really stuck in chronic freeze, or if our clients are really stuck in chronic freeze, they might not even be able to feel that. They might need to just hold something in their hand and just feel the texture of that. Right? Making connection to their hunger, to their thirst. And is there a place in your body that feels normal or neutral or even pleasant? And so for a practitioner, we're supporting our clients to stay away from that threshold of intense overwhelm and supporting them to just practice sensation, practice connection to the environment in a way that actually feels not so bad. And this is the one that always surprises people. Don't do intense emotion processing. It's a no. It's a no for me. We're not doing that. Okay? We are not doing intense emotion processing at this point. There will come a time for that. But when we're just learning to work with chronic freeze and start to regulate and self-regulate and get the support of co-regulation, we're not going in and journaling through every detail of that horrible story that happened. Nope, we're pausing that. We're not doing that. Why? The system's already overwhelmed. The system needs rest, right? So emotions might happen as you're practicing sensation. You might notice, ooh, a wave of sadness, a wave of joy, a wave of grief, a feeling of anger. And if it's tolerable to just be with that for a couple minutes, that's great. But you don't need to chase that to the core and get all into the emotions of it, because we don't want to do that to your system. It's been through enough already. Let's build up the capacity first, and then the emotion processing won't be so overwhelming and challenging for you. In fact, emotion processing often happens naturally without even telling the story. Once we start to regulate the system, get it out of constant stress, get it out of chronic freeze. When I had that memory integrate of when I was walking and I was able to feel that heaviness and that sadness and be with those tears, that was years after I started doing nervous system work. And it didn't happen in a session. I was just going about my business, and my system had the regulation and the capacity on board, and it was ready to move through that and process that. And it was just a beautiful time with myself. I wasn't pushing that to happen. That happened naturally. This is the amazing thing about the body, you guys. When it gets what it needs, we don't have to force it. We don't have to fight it. I would also encourage you to pause telling the story with words. And for some of us, this can be really hard. There can be something that feels satisfying because our system is dysregulated and it's incomplete, and it feels like, oh, I have to tell you what happened. And I understand that. I totally understand that. And it's not because your story and your experience is invalid, but it's because it actually might be stretching your system more. The story is actually being told in your body already without words. And that's the story that we want to pay attention to, is the body story. And you might even have experience telling the story and telling the story and telling the story and feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm so sick of telling the story. I feel the same or worse after I'm done telling the story, right? Well, that's good news for you, is that as you're working with this first phase of trauma recovery, you don't have to keep telling the story. You don't have to keep telling the story. The freeze response needs time. Again, we can't fight it. We can't force it. It needs time. Once we reach the freeze response, now we gotta follow it and wait. your system will naturally come out of it. It will. It's what the body's designed to do. But it needs time. Heat. Heat is such a powerful tool for working with the freeze response, particularly if you have clients that really struggle to feel and sense, and you're working with them in an office setting. If you can have a heat pad that you can put in a microwave that has a little bit of weight to it, they can put that over their feet or by their tummy, on their shoulders, and just track with them. Oh, how does that feel? The heat gets the blood flowing, the oxygen flowing, supports the system to come out and stay out of chronic freeze. Weight. Something heavy. Doesn't have to be super heavy. It could even just be a pillow over the stomach. A bean bag. Weight can really help us get that extra stimulation to feel that, ooh, there's my body. There's my body. Eye rest. So important, eye rest. In fact, if you're in a flare-up of chronic freeze and you know it, you want to rest your eyes as much as possible. Just lay in the dark with a nice heavy blanket and track your system until it starts to come out. If you're at your computer desk at work and you need a break, just rest your eyes, cup your eyes, give them that break. Healthy fats. Our cells are coated with fat. Our nerves are coated with fat. And so healthy fats in a flare-up of freeze or just in general can really support the body with the freeze response. And then gentle, slow movements. No exercise. No exercise. If you are dealing with an active freeze response or you're recovering from a chronic freeze response, wait until you feel yourself back in the window of tolerance and then get back to your amazing, intense exercise. Intense exercise is awesome. It's wonderful. It's healthy, but not in the freeze response. In the freeze response, we want gentle, slow movements. Sometimes it's even just moving the toes, moving the fingers. Sometimes it's just a very gentle walk. Why? Because a freeze response is about replenishing energy. We need that energy to come out of freeze. So we don't want to be stealing that energy to do a big intense workout that gives us a rush, but then leaves us back in the same cycle. So that's following the freeze. That's befriending the freeze response. So there's another surprising thing that can happen if we come out of the freeze response too intensely and we don't have the understanding and the somatic framing and tools to navigate that journey out. When I came out of the dorsal state the first time, it was quite a miraculous experience. Maybe I'll share that another time. It was a total God experience. But I didn't know anything about the nervous system. I just knew that, oh my goodness, I'm not so rigid. I'm not so heavy. I have more capacity to move. I feel more connected to my body. And then what happened? I thought I had a panic disorder. all of a sudden I'm out of this heavy fog, depressive, chronic, heavy state. And now I'm feeling all this intensity. Well, it wasn't a panic disorder. It was all the sympathetic energy that the freeze response had been holding for me. That was too overwhelming. So being in that shutdown and that freeze was helping me cope and suppress that survival response so that I could just survive my childhood and my teens. So I did it the rough and tumble way. I came out of freeze and I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? And now do I have an anxiety disorder, a panic disorder? No, it was survival energy. Of course, I didn't find that out until years later when I discovered all the work of the amazing pioneers in this field that helped explain that experience for me. I certainly would have done it a little bit differently if I had known that, and I do it differently with my clients, right? Because when we come out of the freeze, what happens? We meet the energy that the freeze has been suppressing for us. So there's specific tools and resources, I call them the building blocks of trauma resolution, that I cover in my program that can help you and or your clients come out of the freeze response without having to feel like they have a panic disorder or an anxiety disorder, where they feel they can actually hold space for what's showing up for them and support themselves to feel grounded without re-traumatizing themselves. So take a breather. I've covered a lot. Let's just take a breather before we go into the last pieces of tonight's class. What is hitting home the most for you tonight? What light bulb moments are happening for you? Everything. It's always like everything. I know that feeling. Yeah. Anything surprising that you've heard tonight? Jennifer says, I found hot yoga brought all sorts of things up. Yeah, hot yoga is pretty intense for somebody with chronic freeze to be doing. Surprised to learn that panic and anxiety are freeze response symptoms. Knowing that coming out of freeze would take its time, but feeling forced to get out of it. Yes. Zoe, I should stop EMDR and trying to exercise so hard. Waiting to talk about the experience. I've been re-regulating my nervous system for a couple of years now and been aware of polyvagal. It's been helpful to deepen my understanding. Yeah. And that was my intention tonight, was to support you to increase your understanding. Krista says, I'm still not getting why too much energy in fight or flight leads to freeze. Well, you will get the replay for this, and so you can replay it and kind of let it settle in. But that is something that we will definitely be covering in the program. So let me talk about Embodied Healing Systems Foundations. Someone needs to mute, not sure who it is. Someone needs to mute. I'm getting some feedback here. There we go. Jennifer, there was nothing else available than yoga and meditation at the time. The hot yoga got me out of being numb. Yep. Yep. So let's talk about EHS foundations. This is really an opportunity for you guys to do this work in a group setting with me. It's a 6-week program in which we are going to look at some of the more nuanced pieces of this. We're going to practice sensation together and tracking sensation for you and for your clients. If you are a practitioner, you've probably heard the word co-regulation, attunement, probably heard these words many, many, many times. And what we are really doing here is understanding how to self-regulate and how to co-regulate in a titrated way without a bunch of catharsis and hoo-ha, but really supporting the body in a methodical, practical way where you practice with your own system. The freeze response is actually, it's only one piece of the puzzle. It's very important. I would say it's probably the most important because when we understand it, we can very drastically alter how we treat ourselves and how we work with our clients. But it's not the only piece of the puzzle. It's part of what's called the phases of trauma response. There are actual instinctual biological phases that mammals go through when we experience a threat. And it depends whether we store trauma from that or not, depends on how and if we can complete these phases. So there are other trauma responses, right? We've heard them. We know about fight and flight and fawn. And so what I want to invite you to do is to learn more about this and to not just learn, but to have an experiential journey with me and the group in moving through these phases safely, methodically. So if you're a practitioner, you will absolutely increase your competence and your confidence when it comes to trauma, when it comes to actually working with trauma, the trauma in the room, and how to track where your client is so that you can respond appropriately to where they're at, where they're stuck in their nervous system and in the phases of trauma response, without rushing them, but actually using your body and their body and the connection that you have to support their body to naturally move its way through the sequence on its own, without you having to overthink and get too involved, right, with their process, but to stay connected and support trauma resolution using your body, using your nervous system. It's pretty powerful stuff. So what we're covering over the 6 weeks is we're going to look at the EHS principles. What is EHS? Embodied Healing Systems. Embodied Healing Systems is my certification school. It's actually a 10-month long certification school for practitioners where we really do the nitty-gritty work. We do the theory, the science, and the practice. We do the exams. We do the homework. We're serious about this stuff, supporting our clients. But I wanted to offer you an opportunity to do this work. But if you don't want to become certified and you just want to get a real good immersive nervous system program and practice for yourself as an individual, Or if you wanted to, as a practitioner, just get some tools and take a shorter commitment, a shorter program that will kind of serve as a launch pad for you that you can go back to again and again and use the tools and use the frameworks and the models of embodied healing systems in your work with your clients. And the students that took it last time had amazing results even during the program, that they were changing how they were working with their clients and they were seeing those results in real time. It's very, very powerful. It's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple when we understand the principles of the body, the grounding paradigms that inform the work, because we have to think a little bit differently when we're working with trauma. We're also going to look at the body's mainframe, the nervous system structure, the many branches of the nervous system, the many nervous systems, and the many things that each branch of the nervous system does. And then we're going to look at polyvagal theory. We're going to look at how we survive, how we defend, how we protect, and how we connect from a very practical, hands-on approach. How this shows up in your life, how this shows up in your client's life. So that it's no longer just a theory, but it's applied. It's applied in your life so that you can see results. It's applied in your clients' lives so that they can see results. We're going to look at the exact mechanism for how the body restores trauma. Why does it store it? Why does it go to the freeze response? How exactly does that occur? We've covered that, the skim. We've skimmed the surface of that tonight. But there is a specific sequence of events that happens in the biology that we're going to break down. And when you know this, you're going to be able to just even see in your clients' words, in their behaviors, in their mannerisms, where they're at in those phases. And for you in your life, you're going to be able to see, oh, that's where I'm at. That's the stage I'm in. And then, of course, we're looking at how the body releases trauma. My soapbox is, we cannot force the body to release trauma. We can't just, say, yeah, hit that pillow with a bat and get out all your anger. It doesn't work like that. That's catharsis. It has its own value. But trauma release is actually natural when you understand the building blocks that you put in place to engage the neuroplasticity of the body and engage the neuroplasticity of the brain, so that the actual trauma renegotiation, which is the very last kind of piece of the puzzle, ends up happening naturally with the proper support. So we're supporting the body to integrate and make its way out of being stuck in survival, right? Bringing energy to the system, bringing a good sense of yourself, the connection to the environment. And as a practitioner, we look at the 3 principles of embodiment and how you can start bringing those principles on board right away. If you're a practitioner that does intake and you do consultation, if you have a consultation process for your clients, these tools will even help you in that process, because you're going to know how to attune and really hold space for your client right from the get-out in such a way that they feel safe, that you're competent to actually work with them long-term. So the benefits to your client acquisition and your client retention are really going to make an impact in this program. And then we're going to look at the PACE framework, which is one of my frameworks. There's many frameworks that we go through in the 10-month certification. But the PACE framework is almost like a basket that holds everything you learn together. PACE stands for presence and pacing, attunement, connection and curiosity, and embodiment. And each of those categories, you can even print those off when you work with your clients, when you're in the program. And it's a way for you to ground yourself, to stay present through the whole process with your clients. So just quickly go through the logistics of the program for you. It's a 6-week live program, live classes. We meet on Fridays. We start on March 10th. And we have 2-hour class. There's a break. There's time for sharing. There's nervous system exercises that we do each and every class. When you're done, if you want to be certified, you need to be live to receive your EHS level 1, your certificate of completion. You need to be live for 4 out of the 6 classes. If you're doing it just for yourself and you don't want to be certified, you can watch the recordings whenever you want. And because the program is a $2,000 program, there is a payment plan. But because it's a $2,000 program, if you decide to take the full certification, we run it once a year, it happens in August, then you can use the $2,000 that you paid toward EHS Foundations toward the full certification, 10-month certification program. So you can apply that as a credit. And the most important thing to know here is that there is a right way. There's a right way to work with trauma, right? If you go to your physician or you go to somebody that's going to fix your car, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And when we do it the wrong way or we do it too fast, we create more downstream problems, right? Like if your mechanic rushes through fixing your car and then you have to bring it back and then you have to bring it back and then you end up paying more money. This is what it is often like when we try and use cathartic practices or we try and just jump into emotional processing. We drag out the journey. That was my experience. It took me 5 years into my healing journey of studying all the psychological constructs and the mental constructs and the codependency and the Cartman drama triangle and the family systems and the dysfunction, family dysfunction, and all of these things without understanding that it was in my body first and foremost. So I had all this stuff in my head, but how did I integrate that? I needed the stress resilience. I needed the regulation. So in Embodied Healing Systems Foundations, you're going to learn the right way so that you can speed up your healing safely and support your clients to do the same. You're going to learn to track your own nervous system. And as a result, you're going to learn to track the nervous system of your clients. This work is very felt sense. It's very much beyond words. We use the words to explain and describe, but the experience is about the skill of the felt sense. So you're going to gain tools to use with your clients right away. And we're going to do live somatic exercises each week, nervous system exercises each week. So I'm going to put the link to the sales page, the registration page for you in the chat. And I will just quickly share what that looks like for you guys. This is the page. You can learn about some of the students' experiences that they've had as well. I'll be sending out some emails this week so you can hear from them about what their experiences have been like in EHS Foundations. And you can sign up there. And there is a payment plan option. So if you want to pay in full, you can do that. If you want to pay monthly, you can do that as well. But Say Mickelson, Say is a Chinese medicine practitioner and a life coach, and she just shares about her experience inside the program. And Natalie shares her experience as well. Natalie actually experienced a higher close rate on her discovery calls as a health coach, just from learning not sales skills, but co-regulation skills and attunement skills. So let's do some nervous system practice. Let's do some nervous system practice. When does the foundations course start? It starts on March 10th and enrollment closes on March, let me get my dates right, March 6th. So it's 6 weeks starting on March 10th. So runs at 12 p.m. Eastern. Fridays at 12 p.m. Eastern. So take a moment and just let yourself kind of check in with what you're noticing. If you're not sure where to check in, you can start by checking in with the points that your body is actually making a connection to the outside world. So my back is against the blanket. There's a pillow underneath the blanket. My feet are on the pillow on the floor. And my hands are on my lap. You might be on a bed. Just check in. And notice what happens as you notice those checkpoints. And then we're going to use some touch. And touch is a good tool because it gives us temperature. Can help us bring some heat as well as some containment. So often with the freeze, we feel it kind of, we're stuck up here in the head, we're stuck in the neck, we're sort of rigid up here. So if you can take your hands and actually make contact with your head. You can have both hands on your head. You can have one hand on your forehead and another one just on the back of your neck where your brain stem is, where your head meets your neck. And what we're noticing here is we're noticing how our body is responding to that. However your body's responding is okay. We're just noticing how your body is responding to that. Are you wanting more pressure, like more intense containment? That's what I'm like. I like to have that pressure. I can even feel my breath just dropping naturally without me forcing it as I apply that pressure. And you might just like a light pressure, a light touch. You might just like to trace your fingers. So whatever is feeling particularly good for you, just notice that. And if you can, go back to noticing those points where your body is making that connection to the outside world again. And the last thing we're going to do, you can stay right here if that's just feeling oh so good. But if you have the ability to lean forward, then what I'm going to recommend that you do is you actually give your eyes a rest. That you can use your palms to cup your eyes. And if that's too much, you can just kind of place your hands like this and lean forward and let your head just drop into your hands. Just feeling that drop. And again, notice what happens as you do that. My body feels heavy in a good way, feels heavier on the chair. I've been teaching, I've been engaged, lean forward. So as I check in, I just sort of feel that, ooh, that settling into the chair. And just notice what that's like to have your head supported by your hands, to give your eyes that rest. You can notice the breath. You can notice if your head kind of feels nice and heavy in your hands. Sometimes you might have an impulse to make a sound, like a oh. So I would encourage you to do that. That feels good. And then pay attention to when you get the impulse to come back up. And when you're up, there is an option to look around, to re-engage with your environment and see what feels different. If anything. And if you want, you can put in the chat what feels different. If anything. I feel lighter and relaxed. Awesome, Deb. Very good. And that's just 2 minutes. Tingly scalp, says Zoe. I've experienced that before. And that's just a few minutes. Steph says grounded and present. That is just a few minutes of some very gentle tracking, very gentle noticing. Awake and calm. I can feel space. Yeah. GI motility. Yep. Yep. Love that, Julie. Yep. The body doesn't need us to poke and prod and push and fight. Kristen, when I put my head down, I felt grief. Yep. Yep. And so it's very wonderful when we start putting these pieces together, when we take the theory that's really important and start applying it to our bodies, to our lives. It's incredible the difference it can make. Those of you that are physicians or naturopathic doctors or psychiatrists or body workers, it's incredible how little we actually have to work to support our clients.
No.
When we have that good regulation and co-regulation on board, what can happen in terms of our emotion regulation, our health, and particularly in coming out of chronic freeze, we don't have to fight it. We don't have to fight it. So I will take a couple questions for those of you that want to hang around and ask any questions. I've loved being here with you guys. I love talking about this. This is my favorite. Trauma is my favorite thing to talk about because when you know how to work with it, it's so profound and exciting. The implications of this work for our lives and for our health. Doris, this evening was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Doris. Thank you for being here.
I have a question.
Sure. Who is that?
Helen.
Helen. What's your question?
You spoke about when you're in freeze, the body likes to slow movement and nothing too challenging. Whatever the right word would be.
Yeah.
I was on a PTSD retreat and we did HIIT, so a high intensity workout. Now my body loved it.
Yeah.
Yes, I know I'm in freeze most of the time, and I'm wondering why my body didn't tell me this isn't good for you.
Well, maybe you were not in an active flare up of the freeze response at that time. Maybe you were more in your window of tolerance.
Okay.
At that time, so that it didn't. Because if we're in our window of tolerance, intense exercise is awesome. And it has many health benefits for those of us that are recovering from trauma.
Okay.
It's when we're in that active freeze and we have to push through that to do intense exercise, that's when we get into trouble.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that helps a lot. Thank you. Yeah. My other question was, my body's really tight from trauma. And I'm going to a really good massage therapist and getting fascia release. And I'm wondering if I'm going at it the wrong angle. Is there any connection with fascia release and releasing that freeze in the body?
Well, I can't say if you're going at it from the wrong angle, unless you're getting signals and cues after a couple days after the week that you get it, that you're regressing in functioning, or it's extremely dysregulating, or you're noticing that you're checking out or shut down more. But if it's working and your system is responding well to it, go for it. If you are noticing signs that it's, things are a little bit off afterwards, then you can slow the pace or change the frequency or take a break. But if it's working, it's working.
Well, it feels really good when I'm on the table. I can feel my body relax. But as soon as I leave, I know I'm right back into holding my body tight again. So it's not broken up the habit yet. And I know it takes time
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you said breaking up the habit, Helen, because that's exactly what it is. It's the body's habit is to tighten, to brace, right? So that's where a lot of this will cover in the program as well, in terms of how do we break that habit gently, where we're supporting, because we're not wanting to say to the body, okay, stop bracing, don't be tight. What we want to do is introduce experiences where it naturally opens for a minute, 2 minutes, and we feel that happen naturally more and more. So that plus the fascia release would be a great combination, because they're manually doing it. It feels good, like you said, on the table, but then we need to give the body extra signals that, okay, it's not just when we're on the table, we can actually loosen through more of life too, through more of the day.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great question. Thanks, Helen. Zoe, basically don't force yourself. Yeah, exactly. Basically, don't force yourself. And it's simple, but it's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. Yeah. Any other questions before we go? Out of curiosity, how many of you guys are thinking about joining EHS Foundation? Just put a 1 in the chat if you're considering joining us for that. Zoe, oh, OMG, yes. Yes, awesome, awesome. Great, great. Well, I have just loved being here with you. And I really appreciate you guys being here and sharing this time with me. Your time is precious. And I know it's a journey learning this stuff and overcoming this stuff. And it's my intention to demystify it for you, to open it up for you, to simplify it as much as I can for you, so that you feel like you have a practical way forward. And that's exactly what we're doing in EHS Foundations. And I hope that you've gotten a piece of that tonight that you can take with you into your life. And if you want to, you can turn on your video and say bye so everybody can hear and see each other, if that feels good. Oh, I love the faces. I love the faces. Zoe says I can't. That's okay, Zoe. All right. Bye, you guys. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great night.